I used to think life was like a puzzle. Once you found the right pieces, money, success, love, it would all come together, forming a perfect picture. But now I realize that some pieces don't fit, no matter how hard you try. My name is Alex Carter, and by most standards, I've made it. I'm 32, a tech entrepreneur, and the proud owner of a company that turned a small idea into a multi-million-dollar empire. My name appears on magazine covers. People recognize me on the streets of New York. They envy my life. What they don't know is how empty it feels sometimes. When I was younger, wealth was my ultimate goal. I grew up in a small town watching my parents struggle to pay the bills. To me, money was freedom, a way out. And for a while it worked. I made my first million and thought I'd unlocked the secret to happiness. I bought a penthouse in Manhattan with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I upgraded my car to something sleek and German, the kind of thing that makes people stop and stare. I traveled to far-off places, stayed in luxurious hotels, and collected watches that cost more than my parents' house. Then Sophie came into my life. We met at a charity gala, one of those events where everyone's pretending to be more important than they really are. Sophie didn't need to pretend. She had this perfect smile, a designer dress, and an effortless confidence that made everyone in the room gravitate toward her. When she introduced herself to me, I thought, this is it. She's the missing piece. For a while, it felt like I was right. Sophie and I traveled the world together, stayed in the best hotels, and dined at Michelin-starred restaurants. We looked like the couple everyone envied. But over time, I started noticing cracks in the picture. It began with small things. Sophie always wanted to know where we were going next, what I was buying, and who I was meeting. At first, I thought she was just curious, but then her comments started to sting. "Alex, you should upgrade your car," she said once, running her fingers along the dashboard of my brand new car. "Something flashier. People will notice. Or why don't we stay at the Ritz next time? That other hotel was nice, but we deserve the best." I tried to brush it off. I told myself she just wanted us to enjoy life. But deep down I started wondering, did Sophie love me, or did she just love the lifestyle I provided? The answer came during a dinner party she hosted for her friends. I didn't know most of them, but I sat at the head of the table, pretending to enjoy myself. At one point, one of her friends raised a toast. "To Alex," he said with a grin. "The man with the golden touch. Sophie, you're one lucky woman. Not many people get to live this kind of life." Everyone laughed, raising their glasses. Everyone except me. Sophie leaned over and whispered in my ear, "They're just joking, Alex. Don't take it so seriously." But it didn't feel like a joke. I couldn't stop wondering if there was truth in what they'd said. One evening, I decided to test her. It wasn't something I was proud of, but I had to know. As we sipped champagne on my balcony, I told her my company was facing financial trouble. I explained that things might get tight for a while, that I might need to sell some assets or downsize. Her face changed. It was subtle, a flicker of surprise, followed by a forced smile. "Oh, I'm sure you'll figure it out," she said, placing her hand on mine. "You always do." Her touch felt colder that night. In the weeks that followed, I noticed her pulling away. She still smiled, still laughed, but something was different. One evening, she canceled dinner plans, saying she wasn't feeling well. Later that night, I saw a photo of her on social media, tagged at a rooftop bar, a cocktail in her hand. That was the moment I knew. We broke up a week later. She didn't fight me on it. She just nodded and walked out of my life without looking back. I thought I'd feel relieved, but instead, I felt hollow. For months, I buried myself in work, trying to forget the emptiness. I told myself I was better off, that I'd learned an important lesson. But the truth is, Sophie wasn't the real problem. She was just a symptom of something deeper. I'd spent so much time chasing success and curating the perfect life that I hadn't stopped to think about what I actually wanted. Without the money, the cars, the lifestyle, who was I? One night, as I sat alone in my penthouse, staring at the city lights, I decided I needed to get away. I booked a one-way ticket to London, hoping to find something I couldn't quite name. London felt like another world. Its streets were alive with history, its pace slower and more grounded. For the first time in years, I let myself wander aimlessly, visiting museums, getting lost in narrow alleys, sitting in parks with a coffee and a book. On the third day, it started raining. I ducked into a small bookstore cafe, drawn in by the smell of coffee and old paper. I found a seat near the back and ordered something warm to drink. That's when I saw her. She was sitting by the window, reading a book with a worn cover. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun, and she wasn't wearing any makeup. She looked real. Something about her drew me in. Normally, I wouldn't approach a stranger, but before I knew it, I was walking toward her. "Is this seat taken?" I asked. She looked up, surprised, then smiled. "Not anymore." We talked for hours that afternoon. I don't even remember what we started with. Books, I think. She told me how much she loved reading, how she worked at a local library and spent most of her free time discovering hidden cafes around the city. "It's not about the money," she said at one point, shrugging. "I don't need much to be happy. Just a good book, a warm cup of tea, and maybe some sunshine." Her words stayed with me. When was the last time I thought about happiness in such simple terms? Her name was Lily. When we finally said goodbye, I couldn't stop thinking about her, about the way she laughed at my terrible jokes, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her favorite novels. A few days later, I found myself walking through the park she'd mentioned during our conversation. I told myself it was just a coincidence that I wasn't deliberately looking for her. But when I saw her sitting on a bench with another book in her hands, I knew that wasn't true. "Alex," she said, looking up with a smile, "are you stalking me?" "Maybe," I said, laughing, "or maybe I just needed some fresh air." She laughed, and we spent the rest of the afternoon walking through the park. She told me about her childhood, growing up in a small town similar to mine, and how her dream had always been to live in a city filled with stories. "It sounds silly," she said, brushing her hair out of her face, "but I think every corner of London has a story, and I want to know all of them." "It doesn't sound silly at all," I said, and it didn't. Over the next few weeks, we started spending more time together. Sometimes we'd meet for coffee, other times we'd explore hidden corners of the city. She introduced me to her favorite spots, tiny family-run shops and quiet streets where time seemed to stand still. With Lily, everything felt effortless. I didn't have to pretend to be anyone else. She didn't ask about my job, my money, or my past. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. But even as I fell for her, the fear lingered. What would she think if she knew who I really was? One evening, we went out for dinner. It was a small Italian restaurant tucked away on a quiet street. The kind of place where the tables were too close together and the walls were lined with wine bottles. We shared a plate of pasta and laughed over a terrible bottle of house red. For a moment, I forgot about everything else, my wealth, my company, my secrets. When the check came, I reached for my wallet and froze. I think I forgot my wallet," I said, feeling heat rise to my face. Lily raised an eyebrow. "Seriously?" "I swear, I'm not trying to get out of paying," I said quickly. "We could walk back to my place and grab it." She laughed, shaking her head. "Relax, Alex, I've got this." Her response caught me off guard. She didn't hesitate, didn't make a big deal out of it. She just smiled, handed the waiter some cash, and said, "Don't forget it next time." It was such a small moment, but to me, it meant everything. That night, as I walked her home, I decided to push things a little further. "You know," I said, keeping my tone casual, "I've been thinking about getting a job. Money's been tight lately." Lily didn't even blink. "Well, if you need a reference, I could talk to my boss at the library," she said with a grin. "I'm sure they could use someone to restock shelves." I laughed, half in disbelief. She wasn't joking. She genuinely thought I might want to work with her at the library. That was the moment I knew. Lily didn't care about money or appearances. She cared about people. She cared about me. But as much as I trusted her, I couldn't shake the fear of what might happen if she found out the truth. I thought about Sophie, about the way her eyes lit up at the thought of money. I thought about the people I'd met at endless galas and parties, how their smiles faded the moment they realized I couldn't do anything for them. What if Lily turned out to be the same? What if I ruined everything? The fear kept me up at night. One afternoon, I invited her to my flat, not the penthouse in New York, but the small, modest apartment I'd rented in London. The furniture was second-hand. The kitchen barely fit 2 people, and the place had a cozy charm that I knew she'd like. I like it, she said, running her hand along the worn wood of the dining table. It feels real. Her words stung more than they should have. She liked the simplicity of it, and I couldn't blame her, but she had no idea that this place wasn't really my life. The truth was a ticking time bomb, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep it hidden. That night, as we sat on the couch sharing a bowl of popcorn, I turned to her and said, "Lily, can I ask you something?" "Of course," she said, popping another kernel into her mouth. "Why do you like me?" She frowned, tilting her head. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what is it about me that made you want to stay? I'm not exactly the most exciting person in the world." She laughed. "Alex, you're ridiculous. I like you because you're kind, because you listen, because you don't try to impress me with whatever." Her words made my chest tighten. If only she knew. I couldn't stop thinking about what Lily had said that night. "I like you because you're kind, because you listen, because you don't try to impress me with whatever." Her words stayed with me, cutting deeper every time I replayed them in my mind. She liked the version of me that I'd been pretending to be, the man with a modest life, free of wealth and status, but that wasn't who I really was. The guilt started to eat away at me. Every time I laughed with her, every time she smiled at me, it felt like I was betraying her. I knew I needed to tell her the truth, but every time I thought about it, the fear stopped me. What if it changed everything? What if it ruined us? The truth didn't come out because I told her. It came out because I didn't. It was a cloudy afternoon, and we were wandering through Covent Garden. The streets were crowded, and we were weaving between tourists and street performers when she suddenly stopped. "Wait," she said, pointing at a newsstand. I turned to see what she was looking at, and my heart sank. There it was, a magazine with my face on the cover. The headline read, "Tech Tycoon Alex Carter, London's Hidden Millionaire." For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she turned to me, holding the magazine in her hand. "Is this a joke?" she asked, her voice quiet but sharp. I shook my head. "No, it's not a joke." Her expression changed, shock, confusion, and something else I couldn't quite place. "You're a millionaire?" she said, her voice louder this time. "Lily, I was going to tell you," I said quickly. I didn't know how." "How long were you planning to keep this from me?" she demanded. I didn't know what to say. "You lied to me," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't lie," I said. "I just didn't tell you everything." Her laugh was bitter. "Right, because that's so much better." She looked at me like she didn't even know who I was anymore. Then she turned and walked away. "Lily, wait," I called after her, but she didn't stop. That night, I sat in my flat, staring at the magazine on the table in front of me. I'd lost her, and the worst part was, I couldn't blame her. The days that followed were a blur. I couldn't focus on anything. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her walking away from me. I thought about calling her, trying to explain, but what more could I say? I'd already told her the truth and it hadn't been enough. When my phone buzzed with a text, I didn't expect it to be her. "Can we talk? Same cafe as before." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Of course. I arrived at the cafe early, my heart pounding. Lily was already there, sitting by the window. I walked over and sat down across from her, unsure of what to say. "Hi," I said softly. "Hi," she replied. Her tone was calm, but I couldn't read her expression. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," she said. "About why you didn't tell me." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. "At first I was furious," she admitted. "I felt like I didn't even know who you were, but then I realized I understand why you did it. You do?" I asked, my voice filled with disbelief. "Yes," she said, meeting my eyes. "You've been burned before. People have treated you like you're nothing more than your bank account. I can't imagine how lonely that must feel." Her words hit me harder than I expected. "It is lonely," I admitted, "but with you it felt different. That's why I was so scared of losing you." "You didn't lose me, Alex," she said, "but you have to promise me something." "Anything," I said without hesitation. "No more secrets," she said firmly. "If we're going to keep seeing each other, I need to know I can trust you." "I promise," I said, relief washing over me. "No more secrets." She smiled then, a small, tentative smile, but it was enough. Things didn't go back to normal right away. There were still moments of tension, times when I hesitated before answering her questions, wondering if she'd judge me. But Lily never did. She didn't care about the penthouse in New York, the cars, or the vacations. She cared about the way I made her laugh, the way I listened to her stories, the way I forgot my wallet on our second date and let her pay for the taxi. Slowly, I started to believe that I didn't have to hide anymore. One evening, a few weeks after our conversation, I decided to show her a part of my life I'd kept hidden. "Come with me," I said, holding out my hand. "Where are we going?" she asked, curious but smiling. "You'll see." I took her to the airport, where my private jet was waiting. Her eyes widened when she saw it. "Alex, this is a lot." "I know," I said, "but I wanted to share it with you." She hesitated for a moment, then stepped onto the plane. We flew to Paris that night. I showed her the city I'd fallen in love with years ago, the tiny cafes, the quiet gardens, the hidden spots most tourists never see. It wasn't about impressing her, it was about sharing something that mattered to me. And for the first time, I felt like I didn't have to apologize for who I was. Looking back, it's funny how much has changed since that rainy afternoon in the cafe. I never imagined that Lily would become such a central part of my life, or that she'd teach me what really matters. Over the next few months, our relationship deepened. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments when my world of wealth and her simple, grounded lifestyle clashed. But those moments became fewer as we learned to navigate our differences. Lily showed me that happiness doesn't come from the things you own, but from the people you surround yourself with. One evening, as we sat in my flat sharing a bowl of popcorn, she looked at me and said, "You know, you're not as complicated as you think you are." I laughed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you spend so much time trying to hide who you are, but it's not necessary," she said. "The people who matter won't care about your money, they'll care about you." Her words stayed with me. For years I'd been convinced that my wealth defined how people saw me, that it was a barrier I couldn't break down. But Lily wasn't like anyone I'd met before. She cared about the things that truly mattered: kindness, honesty, connection. She cared about me. A few weeks later, I decided it was time to take the next step. "Lily," I said one evening as we sat together in my flat, "I want to take you somewhere." "Where?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "You'll see," I said, smiling. The next morning, we flew to New York. I wanted her to see the city where I'd built my life, to show her the parts of me I'd been too afraid to share before. At first, she seemed overwhelmed by the sheer scale of it all. The towering buildings, the endless lights, the energy that never stops. But as we walked through the streets, I saw her relax. "You really lived here?" she asked, looking up at the skyscrapers. "I did," I said, "but it never really felt like home." "Why not?" "Because it was all about appearances," I admitted. "Everything here felt like a competition, who had the most, who looked the best. I got caught up in it and I lost sight of who I was." She didn't say anything, but she took my hand, and that was enough. That night, I took her to my penthouse. She stepped inside, her eyes widening as she took in the view of the city skyline. "This is incredible," she said, walking to the window. "It's beautiful," I agreed, "but it's just a building. For a long time, I thought this was what I needed to be happy. But now I realize it's just walls and glass. What really matters isn't in here, it's out there." She turned to me, a small smile on her face. "I think you're finally starting to get it." Our trip to New York brought us closer together. I no longer felt the need to hide parts of myself from her, and for the first time I felt like I could fully be me. But what surprised me most was how much Lily changed my perspective on everything. She didn't just accept me for who I was, she made me want to be better, to focus less on what I had and more on who I wanted to become. One evening, as we sat together on the couch back in London, I turned to her and said, "Lily, can I tell you something?" "Of course," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "Before I met you, I thought I had everything. But the truth is, I didn't have anything that really mattered. You've shown me what it means to be happy, truly happy." Her smile widened, and she squeezed my hand. "You make me happy too, Alex, even if you're a ridiculous millionaire who forgets his wallet." I laughed. "I'll never live that down, will I?" "Not a chance," she said, grinning. Looking back, it amazes me how much can change in such a short time. Lily didn't fall in love with the millionaire version of me, and I didn't fall in love with the idea of her. We fell in love with each other, the messy, imperfect, genuine versions of ourselves. And to think it all started with a simple moment. "Don't worry," she'd said that night. "I'll pay for the taxi." That was the moment I realized that money can buy a lot of things, but it can't buy what truly matters. Because what matters isn't wealth, it's love, connection, and finding someone who sees you for who you really are. And that's something no amount of money can replace.